Hello, everyone. Welcome to everyone to today's discussion, Development While Decarbonizing. This discussion today is hosted by the Harvard Business School Business and Environment Initiative, and we have our esteemed discussants here, HBS Professor Vikram Gandhi and Tata Power Company CEO and Managing Director, Dr. Praveer Sinha. Thank you all again for joining us today. I am Lynn Shank. I'm the director of the HBS BEI, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this discussion as part of the variety of activities going on across the university for Harvard's Climate Action Week. Hosting today's webinar is part of the HBS Business and Environment mission to educate and connect faculty, students, alumni, and business practitioners around the world on a variety of topics at the intersection of business and climate change. Here on the screen are a variety of ways to plug into our activities and offerings at HBS and beyond, regardless of whether you are directly in the HBS network. Certainly, I'll point out that the Climate Rising podcast is the most easily accessible of all of these, with a range of interesting topics. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our two incredible discussants here today. Vikram Gandhi is the Gerald P. Kaminsky Senior Lecturer of Business Administration in the General Management Unit here at Harvard Business School. He's developed and teaches two new courses in the elective curriculum of the MBA program. The first is a finance and investing course, Sustainable Investing, and the second is an immersive field course, Development While Decarbonizing, India's Path to Net Zero, which focuses on climate-related opportunities and risks in a growth economy, much of which we'll be discussing today. He also teaches the leadership and corporate accountability and has taught field global immersion and the entrepreneurial manager in the required curriculum of the MBA program. Along with MBA courses, he's taught in various executive education programs and is also a proud alum of HBS. Vikram is also a member of the Impact CoLab, focusing on research in the area of impact investing, and the founder of Asha Ventures, an impact-oriented venture capital firm that invests in equity capital with a target of market rate returns in social enterprises. Next, we have Dr. Praveer Sinha, who is the CEO and Managing Director of the Tata Power Company Limited, one of India's oldest and largest integrated power utilities. A seasoned power sector professional with a career spanning almost 4 decades, Dr. Sinha has held several leadership positions across the power sector value chain. As CEO and MD of Tata Power Delhi Distributed Limited, he was instrumental in driving the turnaround of Discom through technological and social interventions and setting a benchmark operational model for other Discoms and developing countries to follow. Under his current leadership, Tata Power is at the forefront of transforming itself from a century-old power utility to a company into a new age company with sustainable technology-oriented and customer-centric green energy solutions. Dr. Sinha has led multiple partnerships with national and international technology partners and institutional associations, and he is a qualified electrical engineer and has completed his master's in business law. He's received his PhD from the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, and is a visiting research associate at MIT here in Boston. So without further ado, before turning it over to Professor Gandhi to lead the discussion, a few reminders for our webinar. Audience is in listen-only mode, but you will have the opportunity to submit questions through the Q&A function that I will read throughout the webinar and select a few questions to pose at the end of the discussion to both Professor Gandhi and Dr. Sinha. And so now, without further ado, Professor Gandhi, I turn it over to you, and thank you both for being here, and thank you everyone in the audience.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Thanks for that wonderful introduction, and welcome to all of you, and a particular welcome to Dr. Sinha. What wasn't said in Dr. Sinha's introduction is that he has been extremely supportive of Harvard Business School's initiatives around climate change, very supportive of innovation at MIT. He comes and visits MIT a week a year, really focusing on innovation around climate change as it relates to developing countries. As Lynn said, the way we're going to structure the discussion is I'll just set the stage for about 10-15 minutes, just a few slides, and then really get Dr. Sinha to comment on what he's seeing on the ground in India, what is Tata Power, some of Tata Power's key initiatives, and broadly speaking, how the corporate world the regulatory world, customers, employees, all kind of coming together to address this important issue of climate change. The genesis of this course, and as Lynn mentioned, that this is one of the courses, it's an immersive course, which I do four classes in Boston in the fall. And then the students go to India, 5 days in Mumbai and 5 days in Bangalore. In fact, Dr. Sinha hosts them when they are in Mumbai. We teach the Tata Power case, which I've written on, at the HBS classroom in Mumbai, and then visit the Trombay power plant there. But just to set the stage, maybe on the next slide, is what are the industrialized economies emissions right now, and historically, and that's what has caused the world to develop the way it has really been driven. Historical emissions have been driven by industrialized economies, as you can see. Till about 2000, most of the emissions came from either Europe or the United States. And what I noticed during a lot of our work at HBS and across the Tata Institute is that we were focusing a lot on how do we get that curve going down, which already is starting to go down on an aggregate basis, as you can see. But one of the things which is missing is that there is a whole world out there, maybe over 2/3 of the population, where actually access to energy is still an issue. Growth and development is still an issue. And so therefore, as you can see in this case, while China's total emissions have risen dramatically in the last decade and a half, India's has risen as well on an aggregate basis. And so the question really came to me is that should we be studying and exposing students to the whole issue that how do you balance this development agenda where power and a lot of the things which actually have high degrees of emission are necessary for development, but at the same time have a serious negative impact on climate. And so that was the genesis of the course and the genesis of this discussion. And hopefully by the end of the discussion, we can pass through the pieces as to what really needs to happen where we can make the development and the climate agenda symbiotic as opposed to being against each other. These emissions are on an aggregate basis. On the next slide, you'll see on a per capita basis, India is extremely low. I mean, it's just the math. And places like Europe is nearly 3 times as much as India, and the US is 5x on a per capita basis. And so the issue again is that the per capita, and again, looking at development, India is at a stage where it's about $2,300, $2,400 per GDP. And if you look at history and history of countries, it is at that stage where countries really take off in terms of development. And development requires more power, development requires more steel, development requires more cement, development requires more agriculture, more transportation. All the things which historically have actually contributed to large emissions of CO2, methane, NOx, and any other greenhouse gases. So just again, that's another data point. The next slide shows India's growth story. I mean, just again, to put it in context, today India is the 4th largest economy in the world. It is soon to be the 3rd largest in a few years. A startling fact, which I've seen different data, but let's say 90% kind of is really startling, but I've seen somewhere 75, 80%, is that 90% of India still remains to be built. This is a country which is on a really high, on a large economy basis, on a really high growth trajectory, and 90% is still to be built. And like I said before, all the things that need to be built are expected to quadruple. So, for example, energy, housing, transport, and consumer goods, essentially, the growth between 2000 and 2021 that happened is expected to happen in the next 20, 25 years. And unless we come up with some solutions where this growth in energy, housing, transport, and consumer goods can be done in a way where emissions are kept under control, I think the whole world has a huge problem. On the next slide, just to give you, again, a snapshot, again, the purpose of this 5-10 minutes is just to lay the groundwork for our discussion. 34% of all emissions in India come from power. Another 30% plus come from agriculture. Manufacturing, as you see over here, are the main events are the hard-to-abate sectors like steel and cement. There's transportation and then waste management and others. But as you can see, a big bulk of the emissions comes from areas that are critical for a growth agenda. Um, if you go to the next slide, you see where is India's emissions today. As I had mentioned in one of the earlier slides, India is the third largest on aggregate, very low on a per capita basis. And estimates vary from 3 to 4 gigatons of CO2 emitted, 1 gigaton being 1 billion tons. But the per capita, as I had mentioned before, is far below some of the other countries. But if you took a business as usual, and that's on the right side, which is read as business as usual, that 4 billion would go up to 5.7 billion. On the other hand, if you actually did achieve the Paris targets, it would go down to 2.9, and this is by 2035. If and it just focused on 2050, it would go down to 1. The blue line is what India has committed to, through its net zero targets of 2070 with 5-year kind of intermediate plans that it's highly unlikely to get to what the climate, the Paris Accord said, but it would get to a stage where the aggregate emissions will come down given the path that they have outlined. On the next slide, I want to talk just a minute on this global north, global south issue. So there's a lot of discussion about, and this came out in one of the earlier slides, where industrialization in the Western world has been really driven by the growth of hydrocarbons. And I know CEOs of the oil and gas industry 20, 30 years ago were the heroes of the world. I mean, they were the ones that were powering the world, right? Now you get into a stage where they're not being vilified because I think power is still needed. And I do want to emphasize that this is energy transition. This is not shutting one thing off and opening another. This is a 25, 30-year energy transition plan. But it's easy for countries like India to actually blame the West for this. It happens all the time in some of these global meetings, especially in the COPs. But the fact of the matter is that a place like India is actually highly vulnerable to climate change. So it has to proactively do things to address this issue rather than saying that we need more money from the West. I think part of that is part of the solution. But for example, as it says, the vulnerability is huge. 80% of the population in India lives in climate risk districts. 13 of the world's 20 worst polluted cities are in India. Just this last summer, there have been extreme heat environments of 50 to 55 degrees where it was just people could not work. And therefore, you had to kind of have either migration or change in work habits. The change in patterns of cyclones and monsoon have resulted in higher flooding. And so in terms of the cities, that since you have a huge coastline and massive amounts of potential heat zones, there's, as the number over here says, just another estimate, that 2.4 trillion are required to build climate resilient infrastructure. So the point being that, the vulnerability to a place like India, this is 1.5 billion people in the world. And I think you could make this argument. We use India as an example here just because it is big and therefore the learnings can be applied to other places. But I would argue that in a lot of countries in the global south, you would have very, very similar characteristics. Next page. And therefore, what's at stake? There's water stress, there's there's huge water stress, there's huge health issues around heat-related mortality, migration pressures of people having to move from one area to the other, looking for jobs, and therefore where those jobs come from and where does the livelihoods come from. And given the large coastline of India, urban flooding is a massive issue. Just in Mumbai, for example, where both where Tata Power is based, and I grew up, essentially around 40% of the population lives in slums. And that population is the one that gets hit the hardest when the temperatures are extremely high and when there's intense amounts of monsoon, including with cyclones all at the same time. It actually creates a huge problem for the poorest of the poor. And so therefore, again, from a policy standpoint, from a private sector standpoint, and from a global standpoint, what should we be doing about this? On the next page, I'll just, if you can just flip through this, just in the interest of time. The country has sorry, the previous page. Yeah, so the country has pledged to get net zero by 2070. There are quite a few plans in place, and I would love to hear Dr. Sinha's thoughts on this. Nearly 50% of our installed capacity right now is renewables or non-fossil based. And I do think it's also important to recognize, because I do hear this a lot in Boston, that China and India are creating all these problems and are still burning oil, burning coal and fossil fuels. And part of that is true, but the actual amount of capacity of renewables that is coming on, because it's now become economically viable, is also enormous. I mean, the last stat I heard a couple of years ago was that the new renewable capacity coming on in China in a year is more than the rest of the world combined. And so it's not that these countries are asleep at the switch saying that this is not our problem and someone else needs to solve it, but they are, at the same time, we don't have the technologies which can give us the 24/7 base load factor that we need. And so therefore, fossil fuels are pretty important to actually provide that. There are a whole bunch of interim targets out here, between now and 25, and then going to 2047 and through 2030, et cetera. I won't go into that, but they evolve around essentially intensity of carbon. So a steel plant may reduce its intensity by half, but if its capacity is going to go more than double, the actual aggregate emissions from that steel plant are going up. And so therefore, the issue is that, yes, we can try and reduce the intensity, but the volumes go up. And so therefore, how do you balance that? We are looking at all kinds of various other forms of clean energy, like nuclear and green hydrogen. And again, making those economical is a key area for a lot of the research that goes on in the country. Next page. We have a lot of policy levers. I will let Dr. Sinha comment on these, both in terms of producing products internally, requiring a lot of the off-takers, whether it be on the private sector or the distribution or the grid, to actually take a certain percentage of power, which is renewable. There are a whole bunch of initiatives on the agricultural sector. And then on the next page, we go through some other areas on the hard-to-abate sectors, with a focus on national hydrogen mission, focusing on steel recycling, because the intensity of steel recycling, actually, the emissions are much lower. But the problem there is that there hasn't been enough steel produced in India over the last 50 years to actually start the recycling process. Is just about started. Big experimentations on carbon capture and storage. And utilization, rather, mostly less storage and more utilization, and a whole variety on transport, both in terms of regulation and incentives. So with that, we've also lastly tried to put in, and we haven't really got there, establishing carbon markets. I mean, I think carbon markets could be a way of actually transferring cash from the south to the north, from the north to the south, where, given AI and given all these other demands of electricity and power that are going to be required in the north, and the net zero commitments that a lot of the large companies have made, for them to be actually investing in clean projects in the global south could provide that net zero buffer, if you will, and that target, if you will. Let's stop with the slides here. I would love to, what I did here was just give you an overview of what the issues in India are: development versus decarbonizing. The private sector, and with leaders like Dr. Sinha, are doing a tremendous amount of work around this topic, as they realize that growth is needed, but at the same time, it's got to be clean growth. And so over to you, Dr. Sinha, for your comments and reactions to what I said and your thoughts.
Thank you, Vikram. Such a pleasure to be part of this discussion. I think you have very comprehensively covered all the aspects. It is a problem. India has 17 of the most polluted 20 cities. India has been seeing very severe heat waves last year, and then extreme weather conditions and rainfall this year. Every year we have some part of the country where we have flood, cloudburst, cyclones. So I think this is a thing which is now and here, and it is impacting us, and we need to find a solution. And this is not only in India, but I think all the neighboring countries also face the same challenges, as also countries within the Indian Ocean face this problem. So I think this is something which is staring at us, and many of the things that we have been doing for last many years, they seem to be catching up, and the impact is becoming horrendous. So there is a necessity that we consider climate change and not put it under the carpet and say that this is not a thing of the future, or it will be of the past. It is something which is there presently, and we need to come up with scientific solutions. We need to come up with alternates where we are able to comprehensively address them and mitigate the challenges that we are seeing. Some of the things that you mentioned we need to do, and I think as a country, India has taken a lot of steps. It's fortunate that India has natural benefit of solar and wind. There is more than 300 days of sunshine in most parts of the country. And fortunately, the technology has come whereby a decentralized generation, clean energy solutions can be used both in urban and rural areas. And some of the other impacts of digital technology is also helping us in terms of better management. So I think a lot of things that we need to do, and I personally believe that this is a question of survival. This is not a question of choice. We need to do this, and we need to do it at a much faster pace.
Maybe, Dr. Sinha, you could give us a few examples, like Tata Power being a leader in the space. What are some of the, like, what is your current energy mix, and how is that being changing over time? And what are you actually doing to make that happen? That would be one broad bucket. And the second would be, what innovations and what investments are you making in technology which could help you get to the first part?
So Tata Power has been in power generation since 1915. It's a 110-year-old company. It started with hydropower plant. The purpose was to bring clean power to the city of Mumbai, which at that time, way back in 1900, had a lot of textile mills, and there was a lot of smoke over here because people were using coal for heating water and for the bleaching purpose. So I think Tata Power understands that clean energy was something which was important in 1915, and so is important in 2025 and going forward. Uh, we also understand that we are in the business of supply of electricity, and supply of electricity has to be reliable. It cannot be intermittent. And I always keep on saying that we cannot have a scenario that you supply during daytime or a few hours in the evening, and then you have candlelight dinners every day. So you can't have that sort of luxury. You need to be consistent, you need to be reliable, and you need to have resilience. You need to have a backup. And today, clean energy that we have, the solar and wind, are intermittent. And how do we make them 24/7? And that's where some of the work that we are doing in terms of how do you set up battery plants uh, and have a bundling of solar, wind, and battery storage. How do you bring in pumped hydro? How do you bring the demand side management and demand response so that the profiling of the load will drive the profiling of the generation that you need to do? So we are, as an integrated power company, we understand that it is our responsibility to bring clean energy, but bring clean energy solutions which are round the clock, not just for a few hours. And the pumped hydro and the hydro projects that we are doing will help us to bundle this clean power. And many a times people ask me that, do you think you will be able to give clean power? And I do tell them that yes, we are working on it. It's work in progress, but definitely 2029, 2030 onwards, we'll be able to do that. We've already gone to some of the industries, and this is, mind you, hard to abate industries like steel, and we give them 70% of their energy requirement, and this is 70% for every 15-minute slot. It's not that it's a few hours when you give clean energy, and few hours you have only brown power. So every 15-minute slot for 8,760 hours, we give them clean energy. Once the pumped hydro and others come up, we'll be able to give them 90 to 95%. So what is important is we may not be able to achieve 100%. And when I say we can achieve 100%, but it will be a little more expensive. Affordable power is also very, very important for a developing country, for India. So if we have to be very, very competitive and inflation neutral power that we can provide, I think 90-95% of clean energy can be provided. And it's a very small quantity of brown power that would be needed. Just for the benefit of everyone, in 2023, we had nearly 91% of our power supply was from coal-based power plants. Come 2024, it has reduced to 64%. So while we have very large capacities of coal, they are not getting scheduled to the extent that they have capability. So they are to that extent being suboptimally utilized, and more of renewable energy is being pumped into the system, and thereby reducing the impact of coal-based. And hopefully going forward 2030, 2035, this may reduce to 20% and 10%. So I think in terms of the direction, we are very much there that we need to reduce. It's not that we will completely eliminate coal, but the impact of coal or the contribution of coal will drastically reduce. From the so-called 90, it has come down to 64. And I think over a period of time, it will keep on reducing to 50% or 30% and 10%. And possibly that is the way that we will move. We, of course, are also looking at some of the newer technologies, the small modular nuclear reactors. Of course, it will take time, and I feel that the first of the large number of small modular reactors will start coming in mid-2030s. They still have to come up with the right technology, right price, right supply of the raw material, that is uranium. But that's something where a lot of work is happening, and possibly some breakthrough technologies and solutions will help us to, at some stage, look at maybe eliminating the use of coal-based. But till such time, I think coal will be there, but its contribution will reduce drastically.
Yeah. So one of the things which you mentioned, again, just focusing on the technology piece, because it's my strong belief that, coming up with technologies and driving down the cost curve of just like renewables, like you said, right? 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't really a viable option. It was an option that people did because either they were required to do it or they felt good about it. But now it's but still storage is not. And a lot of the storage capabilities seem to be in China. Could you talk about a little bit about, and like you mentioned, pump storage is one of them. Pump storage essentially being, you have reservoirs which essentially are filled, and then in the night they are let to flow, which creates energy which is not being created by the sun or the wind. But in terms of battery technology, what do you see? Where do you see India's role in that place? And then I want to come to some of the other technologies as well.
So battery technology for power sector, we can have support for 2 hours, 4 hours, maybe 6 hours, but it's very difficult to do anything on a longer term basis. And that's where pump storage becomes much more economical as well as much more robust, where it can operate to 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 hours, depending upon the profile of the supply that needs to be done. So I think for a shorter term, batteries are much better. But if you have to do for a long period of time, it has issues. And also, while the cost has come down, whether the quantum of lithium that is there, is it adequate, and whether this will continue or we will have a challenge of raw material supply, considering that nearly 90% of this, along with some of the rare metals, all comes from China only. And that's where some of the alternate chemistries, whether it is the sodium batteries or the manganese or the aluminum or the flow batteries, liquid batteries, so many of them are technologies which are under development. We ourselves are working very closely with some of these startups who are in very advanced stage, and hopefully in next 1 to 2 years, some of them will be able to commercialize it and scale it up. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Similarly, now one of the areas that I keep on talking about is that while our solar is 100% dependent, or to a very large extent dependent on polysilicon, most of it again comes from one country, and you do not have the facility to make polysilicon and ingot. And in fact, 90 to 94% of that comes from just one place. And do we need alternate technology? Can we have peroxides? Can we have the organic materials? Can we have thin film technologies? So I think some of these disruptions will be very, very necessary for us to get away from single source supply, because security of supply is also as important as the availability and cost of supply. And we need to have alternate technologies so that we can beat some of these single source supply challenges.
Yeah. So, I mean, would it be fair to say that apart from the baseload factor, that for India to actually have fossil fuel-based plants is actually, or importing oil, is basically a security issue, because otherwise you're just dependent on one country for a big part of the supply chain. Would that be a fair comment?
At present, yes, that's not only for us, but globally also. So
Yeah.
if you see today, the manufacturing capability, China produces nearly 600 gigawatt of solar cell module, and associated wafer, ingot, and polysilicon. And all the rest of the world put together don't even do 100 gigawatts. So I think we are very, very vulnerable in terms of the single source supply that is happening. And they have the technology, they have also the economics of scale. So it will be very, very difficult for anyone to compete on the full cycle or full stream of supply that comes from there. Uh, India has created manufacturing capability for module, and we are now adding the cell, but definitely it will never be able to compete in terms of price until unless you have non-tariff barriers where you prevent some of those supplies coming from a certain geography or certain country. So I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that there is a whole lot of work that needs to be done. Technology disruptions have to happen, and then only we will be able to say that yes, we have alternates to just one geography, and also we have a cost competitive solution. It cannot be that the alternate solutions are frightfully expensive, which electricity energy is being used by everyone. And when we talk of energy, it's not only energy for electricity, but also in terms of how you can use that and channelize it for mobility, hard-to-abate industries, because the impact on environment is not just by the electricity supply companies, but also by others who have making equal contribution in these areas.
Two other quick comments on technology, and then I want to move to Tata Power's role of what I would say democratizing energy access, because I think that's such a really critical thing that you'll do. So what is your perspective on green hydrogen and carbon capture? Because those are other two technologies which are at least talked about as a potential solution for a place like India.
Absolutely right. And I think carbon capture is another area that we need to work somehow. The technologies that are there are not cost effective, and until unless there is a grandfathering or a subsidy that is provided by the government, it does not make sense, because while the carbon capture can happen, the utilization is the issue. And how do we utilize it and make money out of it so that it becomes cost neutral? on hydrogen, again, the cost is today very high because it's very much dependent on the cost at which power is supplied. The disruption of in power supply has to happen, whereby if we can produce power at 1 cent or 2 cents, possibly we will be able to give the hydrogen at $1 or $2. But till such time it does not happen, we will have a challenge. The second is on the policy part of it, and you did mention in your presentation that the carbon market and the carbon tax. We don't have carbon tax in India, as also in many other parts of the world, except in Europe and UK. And until unless we bring in the aspect of carbon tax, whereby you have a penalty, or you give certain incentive for people that if they have a carbon capture technology or they are using hydrogen, they will not be imposed the carbon tax. So either incentive or penalty will be important for us to have more usage of hydrogen, at least in the initial year, before they become very competitive for it to sustain on its own.
Yeah. So one of the things on that topic, and I just throw this out there just for your comment, which is, so let's take the steel, hard-to-abate sector, right? I think a lot of the larger steel companies, one of your group companies, Tata Steel, and some of the other larger companies are putting in significant amount of efforts to reduce the carbon intensity of their production, right? So going from, say, $2.30 per ton of steel to, to maybe 1.7, 1.8. A large part of that is actually coming because the power being supplied is renewable power as opposed to fossil fuel power. But if the government mandated, I'm just asking, if the government mandated that you have to go down to, say, one ton of CO2 per ton of steel, and which is comparable to what's in the US and some other places in Europe. Essentially, my understanding is that half the steel industry in India, small scale industry, small scale, would actually go out of business. And so how do you deal with that conundrum? Maybe a Tata Steel or some of the other large steel players could deal with that, right? They can make the capital expenditures to make it happen. It's a regulatory requirement. But that's where I think this whole challenge of development, because so much of business in India is by small scale industries. And trying to push a climate agenda on a small scale industry, in my view anyway, is extremely hard. So how would you react to that comment?
I think then before one does such a thing, there has to be a transition roadmap whereby you need to provide them financial support, whether it is through interest subvention or it is through soft loans. So it has to be done in such a way that it is less pain. There cannot be zero pain in this, but there would be less pain. And if it is done right across the industry, then everyone will be doing it. And it would not be that there would be uneven benefit to small or medium or large industry. So the rule should be for everyone. And on a generic basis, everyone will have a little higher price because you have to go through the mode of reducing your emissions. But I think it's a pain that we need to take. I remember many years back, we were talking about putting FGDs or NOx burners. It will lead to increase in cost of production of power from coal-based plants, but then that's a necessary thing that you need to do. So I don't think we should really worry about it beyond a certain state. That yes, it will be little inflationary, but it will to a large extent bring down the emissions that comes from these type of hard to abate industries.
All right. So before I take we take questions for the audience for you and me. So you have, say, broadly speaking, four stakeholders as Tata Power. One of the stakeholders is the government, the community in which you operate. And the other one is obviously your investors, you have your customers, and you have your employees. I mean, this is a framework of one of the courses that I teach at Harvard called Leadership and Corporate Accountability. So it's like balancing how a CEO like yourselves balances the various demands of these four stakeholders. So let's take the government, for example. What more could they be doing, or what more do you think they should be doing to actually accelerate this process? Because the way I see it, with demand going up, production going up of hard to abate, of highly emitting industries, unless there's some really severe crackdown, and like you said, it can't be, it's got to be a transition, and then the government's got to pay for it, and then you say, well, does the government have money to pay for it? It has so many other priorities. So what do you think the government should be doing as a first step? Like anything more than what they're doing right now?
I think the mandate for, say, for every steel plant and fertilizer and oil refineries, 10% hydrogen usage. Now,
Yeah.
everyone will be getting a level playing field whereby everyone moves to the using hydrogen, and the cost will go up a little bit, but that's okay if everyone is on the same has the same requirement. Similarly, in many of the areas, I think the speed at which the implementation can happen. And just to give you some numbers, that and India's number, of course, is very good compared to many other parts of the world. Last year, we added a capacity of nearly 30 gigawatt. We had 24 gigawatt of solar and about 5 to 6 gigawatt of hydro and wind put together. This year, we will do much better. But last year, during the same period, China added something like 400 gigawatt.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in this year, in the first 6 months, in H1, China added 221 gigawatt of solar. So with that sort of capacity addition that is happening over there, there is a necessity that we also look at enhancing our capacity. And mind you, we are quite capable of doing it, but I think some of the issues relating to land and the ROW for transmission systems and all that. And while Government of India does a lot of things and comes up with policy decisions which are very, very encouraging, I think the states of the country have to also rise to the occasion and support. Similarly, the Government of India came with a fantastic program on rooftop solar, which is the Prime Minister program, where 10 million homes have to be. Now, that needs to be supported by the states also. And India has 250 homes. 10 million is a very small number. I would like to believe that at least 50 million we should be able to do. And how quickly we can do that, and then maybe do 100 million. So I think we have great programs, but the speed of execution can be much faster. Getting the states to come on board, and if you see the whatever has been done in China, it's the 21 or 22 provinces that they had, and the four special administrative regions. They are the ones who drove most of the agenda of change. And if India, we can have similar agenda of change happening in the states, and they competing with each other to get more investment and more changes that is happening. I think the so-called 6%, 7% growth can definitely touch a double digit of 10%. So I think opportunities are there. We have, fortunately, the technology, but I think the will to do has to happen much faster and much better in the states.
I think that's right. I mean, just for the benefit of the audience, India is a federal system. There's a central government which puts in a lot of the policies, et cetera, but a lot of the execution happens at the state level. And what Dr. Sinha is saying is, while the policies may work, the speed of execution is probably a little wanting, especially in some states. What do your investors tell you, Dr. Sinha? You're one of the first few firms which has actually said, we are going to a percentage of our it will be renewables. Some other power companies have said, oh, well, we find all these fossil fuel coal plants which are going for like 50 cents on the dollar. We might as well buy those, restructure them. There's a hell of a lot more money to be made over there. So what are investors telling you?
I think investors are looking for growth. And today, opportunities for growth are not only in setting up coal-based plants, but also setting up hydro plants, pumped hydro plants, transmission system, distribution. And we have a portfolio of projects in each of these areas. Unlike many others who are only in few sectors, we have a huge renewable capacity pipeline, and these are not just standalone uh, solar or wind, but these are hybrid plants. These are round-the-clock plants with storage that we are setting for ourselves. We are into manufacturing of solar modules and cells, one of the best in the country. We are into rooftop. We are into pumped hydro and hydro. We are into transmission. So I think we have a whole portfolio. And till such time, I can show to my shareholders the growth and quality and quality returns. They are quite okay with that. So it's not that there is only one area that we could have gone and grown over there. And I think our belief is what is good for the country is good for our company and good for our shareholders. And we strongly believe that sometimes you need to leave something to get some other area which is much profitable and much better.
And one of the areas which you've done a phenomenal job is really that so much of India doesn't have access to energy, and the decentralized, the microgrids and other things that Tata Power has kept taking a lead on. And so with that, on that kind of summary note as to where, growth and good growth, like you say, is critical, maybe Lynn, if there are some questions, we have about 10, 15 more minutes.
Absolutely. We do have a number of questions coming in right now. So I'll start with one that actually builds on what you were just discussing. We had a question saying, Dr. Sinha, you spoke about the intermittency of solar and wind energy. How do you actually see the role of behind the meter grid technologies in India? Should there be more focus by the government towards incentivizing the use of these technologies?
Absolutely right. And I am a strong believer that behind the meter solutions, distributed generation is the way whereby we can democratize the use of energy. And the more we empower the consumers, wherein they can produce their own energy, use it, and store it also, and in some cases, supply it to others in the community, I think we'll be much better off because at the end of the day, energy is something which is required by everyone. And the more democratization is done, the much better impact will be there. To tell you very frankly, in India, the monopoly of the distribution companies have to be broken, and it cannot be only one entity which is controlling the supply of electricity. And if we can break that monopoly, I think the quality of service will improve.
And we can see that as an example. Dr. Tata Power has bought now Delhi distribution, the Orissa distribution. Orissa is another state which actually the distribution was government owned, and if I may accurately say, not working very well. And it was a major restructuring that happened, and now Orissa is actually doing pretty well. So that's a good model for another case study, potentially, Dr. Sinha, as to restructuring of discounts.
Yeah, and it's a great public-private partnership. Our government-run system had all the ills and all the negative things about for the customers, employees, government. Everyone was losing money. Everyone was at the receiving end. And today, everyone has benefited. The consumers are much better in terms of better quality service. The government is better off because it's not losing money; it's actually making money out of it. And for the employees also, there's a sense of pride. Otherwise, everyone used to say that you guys do a lousy job. So I think it's a win-win for everyone. And some of these solutions, we need to actually go and replicate it in many other parts of the country.
Thank you. Another question applies to both of you. Could either of you talk more about carbon mitigation and work being done in the area of carbon capture and storage? What are your views on CCS infrastructure and also on natural carbon capture, such as mangrove, seagrass, and salt marshes?
Yeah. Dr. Singh, why don't you take that first? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's virtually very little work that is happening in the country. Whatever has happened are more at the pilot basis, and the economics of it has not been demonstrated. What is important again is that if we have either the carrot or the stick, the incentive, or you have the penalty, then possibly this can happen. Alternatively, is we can have a disruption in technology, and some very smart technologies can come whereby the carbon that you capture can be used for producing ethanol or methanol or some of the other chemicals. Then possibly it will make economic sense. But to tell you, I don't come across anything which is very interesting or very useful in the country as yet.
Yeah, I think there are some pilots, just to build on that. There are some pilots going on with particularly the steel companies, where, again, it's a small pilot with some of the smaller plants of looking at carbon capture and then reusing whatever is captured back into the plant. But in terms of actual carbon capture and then storage somewhere and transporting it where it's needed, is still a while to go. I do think that some of the policies that are placed in terms of regulation of, again, like you said before, of X% of hydrogen being required to be used, clean hydrogen, I think is definitely on the cards. As far as nature-based, I think nature-based solutions have had their own problems in the past in terms of both verification, longevity. There are a lot of initiatives going on in that. And I think I'll just say this one thing. I think that's where I think a North-South dialogue really will help, because I am aware of a couple of the large IT companies, the big technology, the big, whatever, the big seven. Given the fact that between them, they're going to be spending $4 trillion in data centers all over the world, all those data centers will generate high degrees of emissions. Most of them will be powered, hopefully, by renewable. But I think I don't think it'll be 100%. And so therefore, I'm quite aware of some very interesting projects where projects being developed in India, both agri-based as well as technology-based. So you have two kinds of carbon capture. Right now, 95% of all carbon trading is agricultural-based carbon trading. It's expected to change. That mix is expected to change big time once carbon capture and other technologies start becoming viable. But there are some very interesting, I can't take the names of the companies, some very interesting long-term projects where a project is being developed in India, which is reducing CO2 by X, and that is being used by some of the companies who cannot meet their CO2 targets because of this explosion of AI. So I'm hopeful from that perspective. And then that's the way, if you think about it, what does that do? That is basically money going from the north to the south. And so, I think government spending, like in this last COP, it was 300 billion, and everyone was uproar about the number. So I think there's got to be a private solution to this whole north-south problem, and carbon capture and carbon solutions, both agricultural and non-agricultural, could be part of the solution there.
Great. And we've had a few questions coming in about finance and the capital stack and different types of investors. So to try to paraphrase and combine these, there's a question about, what are the nuances of the capital stack of long-term investors with different risk appetites and different degrees of urgency to support the rollout of different decarbonization technologies? What types of messaging will work differently for domestic Indian investors versus global investors? And what measures has the government used already to attract investment in these different areas, whether for domestic or global investors?
So I think for the long term, the government has given a lot of comfort in terms of long-term take or pay contracts, which I think, has come to stay and has been supported by various legal forums, the Supreme Court and everyone. So I think that that's a big comfort that if you have a robust take or pay contract, you will be able to get paid, and that has been there for some time. But apart from that, I think some of the basic infrastructure that has been created again supports many of the investors, especially long-term investors. So there have been many examples where the solar parks or the wind parks have been set up by the government, or the power evacuation arrangements, which in term enhances the financeability of the projects. We have also had some of the multilateral supporting some of these projects. So I think there has been a lot of effort, but uh, uh, I think one area that we have not been able to see is very long financing. Most of the financing that we still have are 15 years door to door. There have not been many instances of 20 and 25 years, especially in hydro plants. You need that sort of support, whereby if government guarantees or gives certain sort of support, that sort of long-term financing can be arranged. Uh, but for the equity part of it, there's been no shortage of investment that we have seen. All sorts of funds, sovereign funds to private equity have done large amount of investment in the country.
Yeah, so India has actually been one of the better performing markets here recently, and a lot of demand for that. I think one other example I would give, which is not necessarily India, but I know people are talking about it, is this whole issue of companies needing capital to go from gray to green, right? You can't just go gray to green overnight. You need that capital, which is somewhat patient, which says that ultimately being green is really important. And I think a lot of the sovereign wealth funds and pension plans are thinking that way, that rather than saying, there's this classic debate, I will not divest in oil and gas companies versus I will divest in oil and gas companies, in fossil fuel companies, only if they actually have a pretty robust plan as to how they're going to change their business model and their capital allocation, and how our capital can help them do that and generate a great return. And so I think you're starting to see some dialogues happening along that, and some investments, and not in India right now, but I know investments globally, which are essentially that, which is companies are saying, okay, well, I need X amount to go from gray to green. I need 15, 20 years to do it. I have some investors who want me to drill as much oil and gas as I can in the next week. So I need some investors who are, believe in the energy transition, not for any other good, that we need oil and gas in the near term, but in the long term, the world cannot survive if that's all we have. And so therefore, there's got to be a transition phase. And I think those are mainly the long-term investors, who are like, when they're long-term investors, like Dr. Sinha was saying, they're not people who are focusing on, when they say a quarter is 90 days, they're looking at 25 years. That's a quarter for them. And therefore, their liability structure is such, like a sovereign wealth fund's liability structure, a big family office's liability structure, a pension plan's liability structure, are 20, 30-year liability structures. And so therefore, they've got to match their assets to meet that.
Thing. And as we're nearing the end of this, the audience for this webinar is from all over the globe and from various backgrounds and professional situations, but the majority, or at least half of the audience, are students, not only from Harvard Business School, some of them, but recent alumni, and as well as students from other institutions. And so I'd just like to ask for a very quick thought from each of you on where's the opportunity. If this is a topic that one cares about, whether it's energy transition or the region in particular, where do you see the biggest area of opportunity to get involved?
I think the technology disruption is the biggest opportunity. We talk of nuclear fission, there is talk of nuclear fusion. We talk of normal transmission system, but there is so much of discussion on superconductors, which can transmit 10 times the normal supply of electricity. We talk of newer ways of producing electricity. I think there are a whole lot of technology developments that is happening, and possibly the existing conventional way will go for a change. Newer ways of battery storage, new chemistries will come much cheaper and much smarter. So I think, and then the digital part of it, whereby you will be able to produce exactly to your requirement. So every house will get the opportunity, and like through your mobile, you can make any payment anywhere. You can buy and purchase and sell electricity through an app, and you can decide when to have the clean energy and when not to have clean energy. So I think the digital technology will be a game changer, and we can really optimize the use of energy in such a way that it's the lowest cost and the lowest in terms of the quality of power that you would be utilizing. And energy can be used in everything. It can be used for industry, it can be used for transportation, it can be used for every application that you can think of.
Yeah, I would echo that thought in terms of technology. I mean, if I look back and think, I think this is a generational lifetime investment opportunity by far. I mean, if I look back to the horse carriage going to carbon-based vehicles, and that everything there was no carbon, and then basically in the last 100 years, everything became carbonized in some shape or form. Now we're going to move towards everything getting decarbonized. And that'll take time, but I think the innovation that's going to come, like I said, I take this immersive class, which I have. We spent 5 days in Bangalore, and some of the startups that we're seeing there, the value that's being created there, a lot of them are taking technologies maybe being developed in the US or China, but then really operationalizing it for the Indian use. A lot of them are developing core technologies in India for export purposes. So, I mean, this is probably for any students watching this, I mean, this is a generational lifetime investment opportunity. And I think, now AI is getting a lot, and AI for climate solutions, huge opportunity in my view. So I think, marrying those two huge problems that we have, or opportunities, I think, I don't actually view them as, they are big problems, but I think big problems come massive opportunities, and I hope you guys will take care of them, take full advantage of them. So thank you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. I love ending on that note. Thank you very much, Professor Gandhi and Dr. Sinha. Generational and lifetime investment opportunity is where we'll end. Recording of this, an edited recording, will be available to the participants in a few weeks' time once we have a chance to caption it. And thank you all for joining, and thank you very much again.